Thank you so much for being here this evening for this conversation. I'm really excited, and as Gary said, if you have questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. So speaking of Zoom functionality, let's see if I can get this PowerPoint to work with me. It doesn't often like to do that. Okay, can you see that? Awesome. I'll just go slide by slide. So you're here for anti-racism in your business, moving from conversation to action. And I am hopeful that at the end of our time together, you'll feel a little bit more confident in doing just that. My name is Brandyn Campbell. Those are my kids, Riley and Matthew. They are the joy of my life, a big reason why I do many of the things that I do. I am a business owner just outside of Philadelphia, and I have a communications company that does anti-racist communications consulting. And by that means I work with companies to help them integrate their values for diversity, equity, and inclusion into their internal and external content and messaging. And I also help them create more diverse focused content. My background is in content strategy and content creation. And before that, I was in education and did diversity, equity, and inclusion training for teaching education leaders. So it's been a nice synthesis to this point. And it is a very important conversation. And I'm really glad that we have this time together to talk about some of these topics. I absolutely love this quote from Austin Channing Brown. Many of you may have read some of her work, but it really puts the focus on what this is all about. The work of anti-racism is the work of becoming a better human to other humans. There are so few things in life that are ever that simple, it seems, but this is really what it is. Some people will try to say, oh, I don't want to get political. It's not political. It's literally about the value of human lives. It's a moral issue. It's an issue of humanity. So this is such a great, simple quote to think of to really frame how important this work is in the moments where we may get overcome by feelings or we may feel defensive. It's not about those things. It's literally about being better to other humans. So we probably each day get out of bed and want to be a better person, want to do better than we did before. Anti-racist work is very similar. It's ongoing. It's something you'll try, you'll stumble, and you get back up because the stakes are too high not to. And this evening, the timing is really interesting because the national and global conversation is about the continued tragedy that surrounds the murder of Breonna Taylor. The Kentucky Attorney General yesterday issued really non-indictments, charges that show that literally property matters more than this beautiful young woman's life. And that is such a hard reality to swallow, and yet it absolutely is the reality of life in the United States for so many Black people. Think of what that message sends to Black women everywhere, Black men, brown people. And there's just such a long list of names. I've listed some there. The events of the summer, the murder of George Floyd, really seemed to kick off what some in the media have called our racial reckoning, but it was the start of this conversation we're having about race. And I'm very glad that we're having it because just like in our personal lives, you can't get past an issue if you keep sweeping it under the carpet. You have to confront it. You have to deal with hard feelings and hard things and have hard conversations. And, these situations have been happening in our country for centuries. But what was unique about George Floyd's brutal murder is it was at a moment where our country paused. We couldn't turn away. We couldn't distract ourselves. And that has led to this awareness. And I'm really hoping that this is an opportunity that isn't squandered there was a civil rights movement that achieved so much, but yet we're here at this moment. My hope is Riley and Matthew, who you saw in the introductory picture, that they don't have to continue this fight or have the talk that all Black parents have to have with their kids, with their own children. So we're talking about anti-racism, and it's important to understand what that means. We have some ideas. You may have read Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. I used his definitions to frame this conversation. So he defines a racist as one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. So, okay. And then he defines anti-racist this way. One endorses either the idea of a racial hierarchy as a racist or racial equality as an anti-racist. One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. So let that sink in for a little bit. The reason I titled this presentation, Anti-Racism for Business, is the very definition implies action. And action is what's needed to show people like Breonna Taylor who were, murdered and haven't seen justice. Let's show them that their lives weren't in vain. There are the complexity and the systems that support racism have to be dismantled, and that's something that has to be done actively and intentionally every single day by every single one of us. So why does it matter? Why are we talking about this topic and business? There's so many interesting implications of this moment where we are. One that I find the most interesting is that radical is now the norm. What was once, maybe even as early as February or March, people would have said, oh, Black Lives Matter, oh no, I'm not gonna say that. And now we're at a point where there are Black Lives Matter marches in suburban towns and rural towns all over the country, all over the world. 67% of American adults, when interviewed by Pew, said that they support the statement and the sentiment of Black Lives Matter. That's really significant, and that's something that individuals as well as businesses should really think about and take to heart. Because if it's 67%, that's a significant majority. Hopefully you're embracing anti-racism because it's your moral and ethical value, but also when it comes to bottom line, content marketing and any kind of marketing is about speaking to your target audience. Some of the 67% is in that audience. They are looking to you to see, what are you doing to do better, to be better, to make the world better? And they also want to feel spoken to and included in the way that you speak with them. So it really has a lot of practical implications as well as the ethical line. So some examples of how this plays out in our everyday lives in ways that we may not have thought of. Words matter, and the picture of of beauty products was intentional because there are actually a lot of moments, and I had a moment like this weekend. I wanted to treat myself, so went to Sephora. There are a lot of moments where I wonder just unintentional moments where you see kind of the values that we're fighting against that are just everywhere. They're so deeply rooted. So the term white supremacy, I think some people think that that term just means Ku Klux Klan and nothing else. What it really means is the literal meaning is white-centeredness. If you think of, and we'll go through these examples, white is the norm and everything else is different. Everything else is other. That starts to have very real implications when people think of white as the norm and everything else is different or abnormal. So the example I had at Sephora, my friend had recommended, she said that she started using a beauty line and was really happy with it. So I went and was looking at some of the shades, and it popped out at me that there was a lipstick color called nude. And what struck me is, gosh, that's not what I look like nude. That's not my skin color. And that's an example with, with women with pantyhose. I'm not sure we're wearing those anymore, but someone does. It is an example that I think we've all encountered. Nude, that's the norm. My shade is, some lovely little name, but it's different. It's not nude. It's not normal. Band-Aids. I'm always amazed when I think about the fact that this company that's been around as long as I've been alive, that, their Band-Aids were created in that kind of nude, beigey shade. And it wasn't until, pretty recently that they were like, oh my God, there's some people and this shade doesn't work. And they might have some money. Maybe we should do something about that. Like, just think about the thinking and the level of, oblivion that must be there for that to just have been overlooked, if we want to put it in the most positive terms. And when we think of we were raised from the very beginning of our lives, think of Disney story tales and princesses, and who's the fairest of them all? The fairest of them all was always literally the fairest of skin color. And we think of what's fair and beautiful as light and white. And that is the sort of thinking that is just permeates our country, our society. It is everywhere. And that is a sort of assumption that we have to challenge ourselves with when we are wanting to be anti-racist, when we're doing the uncomfortable work of looking at ourselves to see what biases that we carry. Another example from my work, I use a site called Unsplash. If you're not familiar with Unsplash, it's a stock photography site. It's free, and it's great because the photos aren't very stock photo-y. They are actually really nice photos. Photographers give their blessing for the licensing for some more exposure. I don't remember the project, but I needed an image of a businessman, and specifically I was hoping to find a Black businessman. So I just typed in businessman. And I thought it was really interesting, and so interesting that I took a screen capture that, the top center picture is a little bit, you can't see it as well, but all but one image was of white men. So when we think of men being professional, even that message in something like just a routine activity, like just trying to find a stock image. And if you've done any other searches of stock imagery, it's awful if you try to find, Black fingers on a keyboard or sipping a coffee cup, which I do sometimes. I don't have an unlimited photography budget, unfortunately, so I kind of want it to look like me, and it is really challenging. And the term representation matters is so true, and it matters in seeing yourself or people that look like you reflected in the small things, not just the movies and the books, and that's all important, but this is an example of how this can play out in our everyday lives and really exclude people. So how does this relate to my business, you may be wondering? So anti-racism, as we talked about, means action. So what I'm finding is that people are really stuck and spinning their wheels with the what can I do and what will I do? And that's where I'm really hoping this presentation and having a conversation with each of you will help you find some ways that you can get out of that cycle and start to take some action. And it's okay if initially it's small until you grow more comfortable. So the first step I take and advise all of my clients is identify your core values. Part of the overwhelm that so many folks are feeling right now is because they have all of this anxiety and anger and emotion about, oh my gosh, how did I not notice this about the lipstick colors, for instance? And it's all kind of welling up inside of them, and they're not sure what to do with that. So I'm a writer. The way I think best is to write, but I think it's really important for folks to get out a notebook or get on their laptop and to answer some of the questions that are here. why am I feeling that I have to do something now? What is it about this movement and this moment that has captured my attention? How does this relate to my integrity? Why is it important to fight the status quo and that systemic racism be dismantled? And I want to make just a little point. For solopreneurs, this exercise can be a little bit easier because they are an extension of their business. It might be a little bit more challenging if you are the owner or part of a larger organization, but still important to define. And how about your commitment? How will I reflect my commitment to anti-racism into my business values and practices? And this one is very hard. How can I consistently check and challenge myself to make sure that I'm continually taking action towards racial justice? So just the exercise of take 15 minutes and try to get clear with yourself on why this is important to you. Because if you're not sure what you believe, it's hard to know how you want to act to define those beliefs. Another way this can play out, that action can be taken, this is a really interesting study that the Washington Post in 2014, so 6 years ago, did an article on, and it showed that 75% of white people in America have no non-white friends. And initially, Philadelphia is such a diverse city, I was thinking, how is that possible? But then realized, okay, thinking about other parts of the country, I can see how that could be. Taking the thought a little bit further, how does that have an impact on systemic racism and inequality? Think about the act of networking. You're connecting with other people because when there are opportunities, you're hoping you can tap into your network to find those opportunities and take advantage of them. When there's a job posting, you post it to your network, you share it with your network. If your network looks just like you and doesn't have any diversity, it's not intentional, it's not no one's fault, but you can see how just that simple fact has repercussions and implications. If you may have heard the comments of the CEO of Wells Fargo, and he's in some hot water and has since apologized, but he made a comment in June saying, it's so hard to find Black talent. And I've heard folks, specifically in the tech industry, say that, and it always amazes me because I think I could name 5 people for you right now. Why is this so hard? Then you think about the statistic and realize, okay, if there's no one in your network and you're not doing anything to change that fact, it might seem that way. It might seem like, gosh, I look out and I don't see any diverse talent. So this is not brought up to encourage people to, tokenize anyone, but it's a challenge to think about how can I, for instance, if my company has a job posting, how can I go beyond my existing network to try to reach more people, to reach some Black and brown folks, if that's who I am interested in bringing into my company, to add some diversity and to add some fairness to this process. So in terms of actions, buying from Black-owned businesses, you've heard that, and it is really important, and I'll say a little bit more about it in the next slide, but it's not a level playing field as much as we would like to think that there is, and the pandemic has really hit Black business owners extraordinarily hard. So no, it's not going to get to just that get to the roots of systemic racism and economic inequality, but it can stop the bleeding a little bit. Black businesses are really struggling to survive because of systemic racism. They don't have access to the funding that's available. They don't have relationships with banks, and it is having a profound impact. So if you have a vendor list, look at the companies where you could find where you know of a Black business and you can replace it with. One way to start, the way I started in this process, Philadelphia has a ton of amazing Black-owned bookstores. So anytime I need a book, instead of just running to Amazon, I go to Harriet's, I go to Uncle Bobby's to see if they have them first, to really add that into my practices, and I'm going down the line and trying to find replacements for gifts. I found a lovely tea shop in Baltimore where I'm going to get gifts from. That is something that is going to have an immediate impact. In terms of your content, your social media, your internal documents and language, think about the languages and images that you're using. There's probably a lot that's unintended. A good way to tell is to just take a step back, try to be impartial and take a look with a critical lens to see what is some language or images that I'm sharing that is not inclusive, that may not include everyone in my audience, and really evaluate where there are opportunities to challenge yourself to do better. That doesn't mean to go find a stock photography image of, a Black person and be like, whoa, look, I'm done. That's not what I'm saying, but I think this is a good way to think of what are some authentic ways that I can be more inclusive. Draw your line in the sand. If you don't know what you're fighting for, then it's really easy to back away and say, oh, well, I couldn't challenge that. And this ties into the exercise of really defining your values. When you are clear on why this issue is so important to you, why you're fighting for the lives of Black and brown people everywhere, friends and family, then it makes it a lot easier when there are decisions you want to make about business partnerships with clients. That's part of building anti-racism into your business. Who are the folks whose values that you've seen, that you've heard? If their values don't align with yours, if they are harming the communities that you care about, you can't continue to work with them. And when you know what the line is, it makes it much easier and much clearer to have those hard conversations and to start to make decisions on who you want to work with. And taking action, that's what this is really all about. 99% of businesses in America are small businesses. And one of my children is downstairs with a video game. One second, let me go ask them to. Life in times of COVID. But I hear from small business owners really frequently that, oh, we don't have a professional development budget. I'd like to do something, but what can I do? The Small Business Administration defines a small business as being 500 employees or fewer. If you think of 25% of small businesses going through, taking some action, having an impact on their direct communities, then that's how you really begin to make societal change. So those small steps, if we do them consistently, can make a difference. And when I talked about the Black-owned businesses, I just wanted to share these numbers because they are really stark. We just may have to include the children in this presentation.
I'm loving it. I like it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It is very authentic. But at the start of pre-pandemic in February, there are 1.1 million Black-owned businesses in the United States. In April, just 3 months later, that number was down to 640,000. So that's 58% fewer Black businesses in just 3 months. So that's why I say if there's any action you want to take to have an immediate impact, that is something that we can all start doing at this moment. I'm gonna see if I can get this little one. Hey, Riley, let's go downstairs. Go find Daddy. Okay, so in terms of content, I am a content creator. So this is a lot of this are areas where I was spending a lot of time and continue to spend a lot of time with clients. What can you do? Raise the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of colors. An easy way to do that, the quote these children are going to be the end of me. The quote, guys. The quote graphics that we all love.
Can we say hello to them? I think they want us to say hello.
They do. They want their star home. No. Please go find Daddy. Okay, please go find Daddy. Thank you. The children are our future.
Yes.
One really interesting exercise, as well as practical, the quote graphics that we all like and enjoy. Look to see, who are these quotes by? Are they all by white men? Am I ever quoting a Black woman? Am I raising trans voices? There are a lot of brilliant people in this world now and, in the past. So find some of those. That's one really easy way to start. The other thing I suggest, do a search on the quotes that you feature. You may be surprised to find people that thought you were familiar with. When you dig a little deeper, many of them can be problematic. The example I brought up to someone the other day was Woodrow Wilson. I was a political science major. And, he started the League of Nations, great. President during World War I, okay. Horrifically racist. So, he said some really great things, but that is just not someone whose ideas I feel should be raised. So that's one practical way to move forward. Diversify your sources. If you are only looking at mainstream media, they're telling one side of the story. There are a lot of stories that they're not even sharing. So simply by adding a few diverse sources to who you follow on social media, making the conscious effort to look at a few additional sources, you'll start to learn more about the perspectives and the stories of diverse people in this country. Two examples that I really like and are my go-to, The Root and The Griot. Those are two excellent sites. There's one blog on The Root called Very Smart Brothers. Brilliant writing. When there's an issue like after the Breonna Taylor press conference, I was waiting to see what they would say, and they did not disappoint me. That is a great way to start to really broaden your mind and perspective to include more voices. And by doing these things, you can really start to change the narrative that centers on whiteness by being conscious of who you are sharing and by, representing diverse viewpoints, some of whom are guaranteed to be represented by your audience. So one example, and I'm going to go through this quickly so there's time for questions, because practical examples are helpful. So one client that I worked with is in the wellness industry, and some of the work that we did she wanted to put together kind of a plan on how she would build anti-racism into her business following the murder of George Floyd. So the first step was that very intentional and important step of writing things out. And she defined the work of her business, the purpose, the community she wanted to create, and she shared that with everyone that she hired to get their perspective, to make sure that there was buy-in, to make it clear that this was her line in the sand. And then another exercise that I think is really important for everyone is to learn a little bit about the history of racism within your own industry. Part of what is so overwhelming about anti-racism and tearing down systems is it's just such a huge topic that it's really hard to grasp. So if you can learn what some of the harm has been that's been inflicted by your specific industry and find some ways that you can start to undo those perceptions, some of the actions, then that can be a really powerful way to exact change within your own realm, so to speak. So in this case, there were a lot of some active voices about the combination of wellness and safety. And if you don't feel safe in your body, then you can't truly be well. And there was a lot of awareness raised on the part of my client, and she's really trying to keep that in mind as she moves forward and builds the community she wants to see within her business. And the final step of what she's doing and continuing to do is supporting the people doing the work within her industry. She's not trying to go in. There's a, we've heard the phrase white savior. There's an Instagram account, No White Savior, that's actually pretty good. She's not trying to shout over or come in and say, ooh, this is what I think is needed. She's taken the time and continues to take the time to find who are those all on the ground already doing this work and having conversations. How can I support you? How can I be by your side? And is finding opportunities to do, to co-sponsor events, to feature their instructors as part of the membership that she offers, so that she's built in support of these groups. So those are some ways that you can think about having action to your business. So just a few closing words. This is a marathon and not a sprint. It's exhausting. It is hard. The days like yesterday and like today and the day George Floyd was murdered, there are going to be a lot of those. There are going to be moments where you just feel awful because you've made a blunder. You can't center yourself. You have to think about that opening quote of "this is about being a better human to other humans," and think about day in and day out how you can use your business as a force for change in this fight. So who's ready? And honestly, if you're feeling like I'm not, that's okay too. I'd love to hear, I'm gonna stop sharing. I'd love to hear questions, and it looks like there are a lot in the chat. Oh my goodness.
I think it's all me, actually.
Okay, let's see here. I'm going through them. I'm waiting for the Baby Shark. We do have the Baby Shark book that plays a song, and I often wondered what possessed me to buy that. Let me see here.
It looks like Jeff has his hand raised.
Ooh, okay, Jeff.
Hey, one great presentation. I really enjoyed it. Really appreciate you raised a number of different questions for me. So
Okay.
I will try not to monopolize all of the Q&A time. So I'll just start with some of the basic ones. A lot of the work that I do with clients, I'm trying to encourage them to be better humans in general. I encourage people to become superheroes, right? So that includes a lot of different things. And one of those is a commitment to being, pro-LGBTQA, anti-racist, and basically just anti-discrimination in all ways. But there's this odd dividing line where I think people have a difficulty understanding the distinction between certain things. And you brought up tokenism. So I wanted to ask you how you would define the authentic difference between what you would see as actions that could be taken as tokenism versus true inclusion. And I think from the understanding I would have is that it would come back to the authentic values and kind of like showing your receipts of sorts. But is there anything else that you would put in there that kind of helps to make the distinction for people that might be on that borderline to help them understand, like, hey, this isn't really authentic what you're doing. You're just checking a box.
Gosh, Jeff, that is a phenomenal question. It's honestly one, I think it does. I don't have a definition, but I'm going to do more thinking on that. I think a lot of it does come back to intention. And I've talked to a lot of folks who are really scared about, if I post about this, I feel like it's in a similar vein. I don't want to be seen as being performative.
Yeah. And
I feel like if you do have those receipts, if someone comes and challenges you in your comments, and you can say, hey, look, this is what I've done, this is who I am. I think if you kind of know that you can do that, then you can go ahead, even if someone and feel like, this is an authentic action and hasn't been harmful. But how do you define that? I think, is it truly who's at the center? Is it truly about that person, or is it about your own ego and wanting to highlight and show, hey, look at my Black friends. Hey, look at the Black hire. Someone who is a diversity consultant, I love how he framed it. He said, I'm really worried about this moment because yes, there is attention on diversity. That doesn't mean going and grabbing any Black person you see off the street and putting them in your company. That's not the solution. And if you haven't done the work ahead of time, you're just setting everyone up for failure. So I think it's not a precise definition, but I think, who's at the center of the action? Is it about the person kind of befriending or partnering with, or is it really about the other person? I'm gonna keep thinking on that though and try and come up with a definition, because that is really murky and that really does trip people up.
Thank
Great
you.
question. Let's see.
And I got others in case anybody is like, you got me thinking on a bunch of different things.
I have something.
Okay.
I'll keep it. If anybody has their hand raised, let them go first.
I didn't see anyone else. So I'd love to hear your questions.
Yeah, so the first was, you actually raised it. I think you said white supremacy like strikes a bad chord.
It can't. I think it does for folks.
I agree. So I dropped a few times and like, what about, and you actually sent it like, you said white centric. And I think that'd be more, I don't know if it's more accurate, because I think the supremacy thing is still, a lot of people in their minds is too much of a reality for them, but it might be more palatable to say white centricity or white centric, to just nudge it over the line. Not that you should be more, any softer with this, but what do you think about that? I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, it probably would be a bit more palatable, less confrontational. But in the end, is it about people's comfort? And a lot of this is really trying to shake people to their core. While that is going to push some people away, but this is hard. This is essentially looking at your life and acknowledging, gosh, everything I thought I knew is not correct, and I have to relearn so many things and reframe so many things. So I don't think there's a gentle way to do that. I do think, however, if you're having a conversation and kind of interchange the terms, that might be a way to kind of engage folks, because I get kind of what you're saying. What I'm guessing you're saying is, part of this is challenging people to have hard conversations. And if you're saying this term that they just don't grasp, I think you can, certainly kind of explain that this is what this means, but it can be everything from kind of relatively innocuous to as dramatic as what we saw yesterday in Kentucky. So, So I think it's a really interesting question, but I would say, and also for the point of not wasting this moment, that people should be uncomfortable. Yeah. Thank you for that great question.
I agree. Can I go again? Can I go another one?
And I'll just comment. Our dear friends from the Optin Podcast have joined. And I will say, when I heard, before I read White Fragility, I was actually listening to the Optin Podcast and listened to Robin DiAngelo speaking, that they had interviewed. And like this term of white supremacy, like as a white person, I never thought of myself as being a white supremacist. I never thought of myself of really being in a position of privilege. And it was like the buckets of water came down on my face. And so despite the fact that it was like incredibly uncomfortable, it almost needed to happen to make change. And so I understand John's point as well. It is much less of a confrontational term. And so it's probably like knowing your audience, like any good marketer knows their audience and who's your audience. But I do think it is really a valid point to really help us to figure out how we make change.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's like white ignorance too. Like we just don't, like a lot of people just don't know. You don't know if you like, that's what you grew up with.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why I think it's wonderful that there's so much, that so many people are reading some of these, books that wouldn't have been flying off the shelves, 6 months ago. And it is really alarming the more you learn. And I think, and it's something, just to be clear, it is something that is the same for, not the same, but it's a process that's Black and brown folks as well. We're internalizing the same messages. And kind of when you start to, for me, when I started to frame, in particular, some professional experiences through, oh my gosh, this wasn't, and this same thing kept happening, and it kept happening to all my Black girlfriends, and kind of realizing that it's different, but it's also the same kind of awakening and discomfort. And there is a lot of emotion.
Yeah, I have two things, and I have one. So I'll do just the first point from experience of like what you said. You have to make an effort to increase the diversity, acceptance, and inclusion. And the second, I think, will be a little uncomfortable. But the first is, so I run a weekly startup event in a nonprofit for startups in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is 90% Caucasian, white people. And I, with our organizing team, we make every effort to include everyone and bring people in from Philly, New Jersey, everywhere. And Gary, you attend, right? And I think we're probably overrepresented with minorities in terms of Bucks County, their demographics, which I love. I take pride in that. We also have folks that present entrepreneurs, not just diversity from a perspective of ethnicity or race, but also from your background, your industry, what you've done, your age as well. Because I've been discriminated against because of my age. I've been discriminated. I worked in Australia for a company in Australia when I lived there, and I was an American. They're like, just stay in your lane, American kid. And was bullied by an HR director, and to the point where I quit my job. So it's a different level, but I feel like at points and times I can relate to that. I was bullied. I'm in my co-working space that I own here. I was bullied by my landlord, who would say things like, "Oh, wipe that smirk off your face." We're just talking about like, the door needs to be fixed. Like we should have keys for that door. And you're saying I'm smirking at you, like that. You say that to somebody you think is a child. So in a way, I can relate that, and that's why, maybe that's part of why, but also because my parents always espoused that, and my dad was an immigrant as well, and he said, we're people, and like the more people you get involved, the better. It doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter what they sound like, doesn't matter what they smell like matters a little bit if they smell bad, too bad in person. But now we're on Zoom, so it doesn't matter. But no, and we just do that. We reach out to everybody, but we do have to make an effort to go beyond white people in Bucks County. And we want to do that. And you know what? And the other thing, the 18 to 34-year-old demographic in Bucks County has been decreasing for the past 2 censuses, and it's going to decrease again. So you can't really grow the economy if you just have old people, nothing wrong with old people, but you got to have something in the middle there. So anyway, so we make an effort for that. So I invited everybody to join that Wednesday morning invite. I can share the link out. But the other thing I saw that, and this might be like, I want to hear your thoughts on this. The Pennsylvania Small Business Grant Program they had for COVID impacted businesses. It seemed everything was very equitable, fair in terms of depending on your revenue, and here's the thresholds and this and that. But there was something in there that said 50% of these will be prioritized for minority or diverse businesses. And that gave me a pause on that. And I am always for supporting Black-owned business, white-owned business, Hispanic-owned, every owned businesses, and specifically I would go to a black-owned business in my town. Like if there's a black-owned coffee shop, a white-owned coffee shop, I would go to the black-owned coffee shop because I understand the challenges that came before that and what they were deprived of before that. Though at the time of an emergency and a pandemic, I wasn't sure that was the time to prioritize that. And I felt that was the one time I felt put off by something like that as a white person, whatever, as a person. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So what I'll say, and I'll try and say it quickly because we're past time. Thank you for coming, Sherlyn. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But when you talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the equity part, it's not equality because it's acknowledging that if you treat everyone, bring everyone in as equals, then you really are assuming that everyone had started from the same spot. And the statistics on COVID are that, I think I had it in my notes. If it's correct, that I think it's something like 17% of white-owned businesses are in danger of shutting and never reopening. That number is 41% of Black-owned businesses. And we were talking a little bit about the historical reasons why that is. And they're not the same relationships with banks. There has been active discrimination with these business owners. So they really are at a time of crisis, as are all business owners, but it's even more acute for Black-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. So I think that Pennsylvania made a call, like we know everyone is being challenged, but especially, and I don't have these statistics off the top of my head, but there was a lot of information about the federal programs not going to oppressed communities. And I think Pennsylvania made the call, like we want to try to even this out if we can here. We know everyone is suffering, but let's try to give a little bit of an edge here. So that's my take on that. We have, and Gary can let me know how long we can go. I know Jeff had his hand raised. So a couple, and thank you. I'm loving the questions, and I would love a link to that Wednesday morning gathering you have, John.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll send the link. I'll stay as long as you guys are going to stay here. I love this conversation.
As long as the kids don't bust in again.
And Brandyn, we want to respect your time and make sure that you're able to get back to your kids. If you would like to answer just two more quick questions,
I would love to.
Quick, then we can definitely make time for that.
Okay, wonderful. I would love to. I know Jeff had his hand raised, and everyone, let me get gallery view.
Why don't you let Jean go first since I already got one?
Okay.
Jean or Jeanne? I don't know how to say your name. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'm Jean Kraft, and just a brief comment that I think, I've been thinking about the difference between being an anti-racist and not racist. And I think that one of the important things is that if the difference is being willing, if you are among those who have been privileged, to give something up. So if I am the white owner of the bookstore that's next to the bookstore that you went to, I have to be okay with the fact that you didn't come in my bookstore. That you made a decision that is not just even Steven across the board, but trying to give a boost up to somebody who has been held down. And I think that sometimes is where it suddenly becomes difficult. When you say, am I willing to give up a spot in a college that I want to go to? Am I willing to do that? And I think that to make up for a deficit that clearly exists, people who have privilege have to be willing to give something up.
Yes, very well spoken. And I think that really highlights the fact that this is hard, it's intentional. but it is for righting all of these wrongs and trying to help move forward. That's it. Thank you for sharing.
Is it on me? It's my turn?
I think so.
All right, so I get to close this out. Sorry, I'm going to ask another, what I think is kind of a complicated question along the same lines of the tokenism inclusion question. So when we talk about anti-racism, the conversation, kind of flows through Ibram X. Kendi. It expands out beyond there, and it goes back into, as you read more and more, it goes back that there have been anti-racists, going back to the days of early, genesis of racism. I think in the conversation right now, it's very easy for anti-racist to be confused with pro-Black for some business owners. And that, I think it's a good thing, obviously, to be pro-Black. Being pro-Black is in many ways, I think, obviously anti-racist, but I think there's also the possibility of other groups that are fighting for recognition and to not be discriminated against, to get lost in that shuffle. In your work in teaching anti-racist communications, how do you keep the conversation, obviously not that it's a bad thing that it veers into pro-Black territory, that's obviously good, but how do you make sure that it's still inclusive of other groups?
That's a great question. Yeah, and there, certainly anti-Black racism is a very specific and very rampant kind of racism, but there's also, in terms of communities facing danger on a regular basis, I mentioned the trans community. We have the horrors of stories of immigrant women, Latino immigrant women missing their uteruses. So it really is, thanks, Gary. There's going to be no way I can say this concisely, but the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, ability level, of sexual identity, it's amazing how quickly the conversations in the work, and a lot of it starts with some companies in the content audit, where you really start to kind of highlight, okay, but what about this member of your audience? And it really becomes very apparent in a lot of situations very easily and very quickly. And so that is how I try to work with clients and starting the conversation. It really, and then a lot of times it does start with pro-Black, with outrage about what happened with Breonna Taylor's case. But then we really start to dig in and see, okay, well, look, do we see how this might be interpreted by this community? And do we see how this is something that is offensive to a trans community member? And I find, and I've actually been really heartened to find, because that's one area where I've worried, like, do I need to bring in experts who specialize in each thing to have the conversation? But the conversation really has unfolded really deliberately. And when it doesn't, I really try to push the conversation so that we're talking about inclusion in a variety of forms, to really start to challenge, to get clients thinking in that way. You're very welcome, and I'd love to talk about with you more. Yes, as Gary said, I love talking about this. I would love to continue the conversation. That is my email address, info@brandoncampbell.com, or you can reach out to the folks at Venture Cafe. They have my contact info. This was tremendous. Engagement is everything, and especially on a topic like this, showing that we're willing to challenge ourselves and have these uncomfortable, challenging conversations. Thank you guys so much.
The only other thing I would add is Brandyn's been really generous with her time to be one of our subject matter experts. So when we've had our connection nights, she's been willing to sit at a table and have these conversations. So definitely look for her in the future as well.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Brandyn. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, thanks for spending part of your evening with me. Take care.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Feel free to jump over to our Venture Cafe After Dark performance happening now. Hope to see you there.
Great. Thanks for moderating,
everyone.
See you soon, Brandon.
Great to see you, Jeff. Bye-bye.
You all.